David Chun had everything a 32-year-old man could want. His tech company was making millions. His penthouse apartment overlooked the city skyline, and his garage held 3 luxury cars. But if you asked his friends, they'd tell you David's biggest achievement wasn't his business success. It was his ability to throw parties that people talked about for months. Every Friday evening, David's apartment transformed into the hottest spot in the city. Business executives, influencers, and celebrities would crowd into his living room, sipping expensive wine and networking until the early hours. David loved being at the center of it all, cracking jokes and making sure everyone knew he was the guy who made it all happen. But behind all the glamour, there was someone David barely noticed. Her name was Carmen, and she was the reason his apartment always looked perfect. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she would arrive at exactly 9 in the morning, carrying her cleaning supplies in a simple black bag. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, dusting furniture, scrubbing bathrooms, and making sure every surface sparkled. Carmen never said much during her work. She would give David a polite nod when she arrived, clean efficiently for 4 hours, and leave with a quiet goodbye that he usually didn't even hear. To David, she was just part of the furniture. Someone who showed up, did her job, and disappeared until the next cleaning day. What David didn't realize was how much Carmen actually saw and heard during her visits. She noticed the expensive art on his walls, the business documents scattered on his desk, and the way he spoke to people on his phone calls. She watched him prepare for his parties, saw how he carefully planned every detail to impress his guests. But Carmen kept her observations to herself. She was there to work, not to judge or get involved in her employer's life. Carmen had been cleaning David's apartment for almost 2 years, but he knew almost nothing about her. He didn't know where she lived, whether she had family, or what she did when she wasn't cleaning houses. In his mind, she was simply the cleaning lady. Reliable, invisible, and completely separate from his world of success and social status. This particular week started like any other. David was planning one of his gatherings, but this time it wasn't going to be at his apartment. His college friends had decided to organize their annual reunion dinner at Romano's, the most exclusive restaurant in the downtown area. Getting a table at Romano's usually required booking months in advance, but David's connections had secured them a prime spot for Saturday evening. The group chat had been buzzing all week with excitement. There was Alex, who now ran a successful law firm. There was Tony, who had made his fortune in real estate. And there was Kevin, who owned a chain of fitness centers across 3 states. All of them had done well for themselves since college. But David couldn't help feeling like he had outdone them all. His tech company was the biggest success story among their friend group, and he never missed a chance to remind them of that fact. By Wednesday, the conversation in their group chat had shifted to an important question. Who was everyone bringing as their date? Alex was bringing his fiancée, a doctor he'd met at a charity event. Tony was coming with his girlfriend, a fashion designer who had her own boutique. Kevin was bringing his wife of 5 years, whom everyone already knew from previous gatherings. David, however, was single. He'd been focused so intensely on building his business that he hadn't made time for serious relationships. Sure, he'd gone on plenty of dates with models and actresses, but nothing had stuck. Usually this wouldn't bother him. He was confident enough to show up alone and charm everyone with his wit and success stories, but something about this reunion felt different. Maybe it was seeing all his friends settled and happy in their relationships. Maybe it was the way they kept asking him when he was going to find the one. Whatever it was, David felt a strange pressure to show up with someone impressive on his arm. Thursday morning came, and Carmen arrived for her regular cleaning session. David was in his home office, scrolling through his phone and trying to figure out his date situation for Saturday. He'd considered calling a few women he knew, but something stopped him. Most of them were only interested in his money and status. He wanted to bring someone who would actually impress his friends, not just look good in photos. As Carmen quietly dusted the shelves in his living room, David found himself watching her work. She moved with a calm efficiency that he'd never really noticed before. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, And she wore the same plain clothes she always wore, dark jeans and a white t-shirt. There was something almost graceful about the way she worked, like she was performing a careful dance around his furniture. That's when the idea hit him. It was so ridiculous that he almost laughed out loud. What if he brought Carmen to the dinner? His friends were always talking about how predictable his dates were. They'd make jokes about him only dating Instagram models and socialites, but showing up with his cleaning lady, that would definitely surprise them. The more David thought about it, the more amusing the idea became. He imagined the looks on his friends' faces when he walked into Romano's with Carmen by his side. They'd probably think he'd lost his mind. But that was exactly what would make it so entertaining. Plus, it would show them that he was confident, enough to break all the social rules they expected him to follow. David wasn't thinking about Carmen's feelings in all this. In his mind, she would probably be thrilled to get a free dinner at an expensive restaurant. He saw it as doing her a favor, giving her a chance to experience a world she could never afford on her own. It never occurred to him that his invitation might be insulting, or that Carmen might have her own reasons for accepting or declining. As Carmen finished cleaning his kitchen, David made his decision. He would ask her to be his date for Saturday night. It would be the perfect joke to pull on his friends, and Carmen would get a nice evening out of it. In David's mind, it was a win-win situation, but as he prepared to approach Carmen with his offer, something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the professional way she carried herself, or the quiet dignity in her movements. For just a moment, David wondered if there might be more to Carmen than he'd assumed. But he quickly pushed that thought aside. She was his cleaning lady, nothing more. And his plan was going to give his friends the surprise of their lives. David watched Carmen fold his freshly cleaned laundry with the same careful attention she gave everything else. She smoothed out each shirt perfectly before placing it in neat stacks on his bed. There was something almost artistic about the way she worked, but David was too focused on his plan to really appreciate it. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. Carmen looked up briefly, acknowledging that he wanted to say something, then continued with her work. She had learned over the past 2 years that David sometimes liked to chat while she cleaned, usually about his business deals or upcoming parties. "So, Carmen," David began, leaning against the doorframe of his bedroom, "I have something kind of interesting to ask you." Carmen paused in her folding and gave him her full attention. Her dark eyes were patient, waiting for him to continue. David noticed for the first time that she had really expressive eyes, the kind that seemed to take in everything around her. "I'm going to this fancy dinner on Saturday night," David continued, his voice carrying that confident tone he used when he was about to make what he thought was a generous offer. "It's at Romano's downtown. You know, that really expensive place where celebrities eat?" Carmen nodded slightly. Of course she knew Romano's. Everyone in the city knew about it, even if most people couldn't afford to eat there. David pushed forward with his pitch. "Well, I need someone to go with me, and I thought maybe you'd like to come along. I mean, when's the last time you got to eat at a place like that, right? The food is supposed to be incredible." Carmen's expression didn't change immediately. She continued holding one of David's shirts, but David could see something shift in her eyes. It was subtle, like she was processing not just his words but everything behind them. "This dinner," Carmen said quietly, her voice carrying just a hint of an accent that David had never really noticed before. "Is it a work event for you?" David laughed, shaking his head. No, it's just me and some college friends. We do this reunion thing every year. Everyone's bringing their girlfriend or wife, and I thought it would be fun to bring you instead." The way he said "instead" made Carmen pause. She set down the shirt she was holding and looked at David more carefully. "Fun for who?" The question caught David off guard. He had expected Carmen to be excited or grateful, not to start asking questions that made him think about his motivations. "Well, fun for everyone," David said, his confidence wavering slightly. "You'd get to experience something new, and my friends, well, they'd get to meet you." Carmen was quiet for a long moment. She picked up another shirt and began folding it, her movements slower now, more thoughtful. David found himself actually waiting for her response, which was unusual for him. Most people jumped at his invitations without hesitation. "What kind of people are your friends?" Carmen asked eventually. David relaxed, thinking this was a safer topic. "They're great guys. We all went to college together, and now we're all doing really well. Alex is a lawyer, Tony's in real estate, Kevin owns a bunch of gyms, successful people. And their dates? What are they like?" This question made David pause. He thought about Alex's fiancée, the doctor, Tony's girlfriend, the fashion designer, Kevin's wife, who worked in marketing for a big corporation. They were all educated, accomplished women who moved easily in David's social circle. They single quote re. Well, they're professional women, career-focused, the type. Carmen nodded slowly, and David got the strange feeling that she understood something he wasn't saying out loud. She finished folding the shirt in her hands and moved to the next one. "David," she said, using his first name in a way that somehow sounded different than usual. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure, of course. Why did you think of me for this dinner?" The question was simple, but it hit David like a punch to the stomach. He found himself struggling to come up with an answer that didn't sound terrible when said out loud. "Because I thought it would be funny? Because I wanted to surprise my friends? Because I thought you'd be grateful for the chance? I just thought, you work so hard and you never seem to do anything fun. I thought you might enjoy a nice evening out." Carmen's hands stilled on the laundry. She looked at David with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't angry or hurt, but it wasn't grateful either. It was something else entirely. "That's very thoughtful of you," she said carefully. "But I have to ask, do you know anything about what I do when I'm not here?" David blinked. The question had never occurred to him. "Well, I assumed you clean other houses." "People like me, meh." Carmen made a small sound that could have been agreement or something else entirely. "And what do you think I do for fun?" David realized he had absolutely no idea. In 2 years, he had never asked Carmen about her life outside his apartment. He didn't know if she was married, had children, went to movies, read books, or had hobbies. She was just the cleaning lady who showed up twice a week and made his life easier. I'm not sure," David admitted. Feeling uncomfortable for the first time in the conversation, Carmen resumed her folding, but David could see her thinking. Her movements had that same careful precision as always, but there was something different. "About her energy now?" "Tell me about this restaurant," Carmen said eventually. "What's the dress code?" David perked up, sensing that she might be considering his offer. "Oh, it's formal, really upscale. Men wear suits, women wear evening gowns, that kind of thing. The whole experience is supposed to be elegant. And your friends, they're expecting you to bring someone who fits into that world?" David nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. I mean, they're used to me dating models and actresses, so they'd probably expect someone glamorous." The moment the words left his mouth, David realized how they sounded. He had basically just told Carmen that she wasn't glamorous, that she didn't fit into his world, that bringing her would be some kind of novelty act. Carmen's hands paused again, and she looked at David with those expressive eyes. For a moment he thought she might be offended or hurt, but instead something that looked almost like amusement flickered across her face. "I see," she said quietly. "So this would be something unexpected for them." "Well, yeah. But in a good way." David rushed to add, though he wasn't sure how to explain what he meant by good way. Without making things worse, Carmen finished folding the last shirt and placed it on the neat stack with the others. She gathered up her cleaning supplies and headed toward the bedroom door. David followed her, suddenly anxious about her answer. "I need to think about it," Carmen said as she packed her things at the front door. "Of course, take your time," David said, though internally he was hoping for a quick yes. "The dinner is Saturday at 8? If you decide to come, I could pick you up around 7:30. Carmen paused with her hand on the door handle. "If I decide to come, how should I dress?" David's mind immediately went to his assumption that Carmen probably didn't own anything fancy enough for Romano's. "Don't worry about that. I could advance you some money to buy something appropriate. There are some nice department stores that have decent dresses." For the first time since the conversation started, Carmen's composure cracked slightly. David saw something flash in her eyes. Not anger exactly, but something sharp and quick that made him take a step back. "That won't be necessary," Carmen said, her voice still polite but with a new edge to it. "If I decide to attend, I'll manage the wardrobe myself." "Oh, okay, great, that's great." Carmen opened the door and stepped into the hallway. She turned back to look at David one more time, and he had the strangest feeling that she was seeing something about him that he didn't see himself. "I'll let you know tomorrow," she said. "Have a good day, David." The door closed with a soft click, leaving David alone in his apartment. He stood there for a moment, replaying the conversation in his mind. Something about it hadn't gone the way he'd expected, but he couldn't put his finger on what exactly had been different. He pulled out his phone and opened the group chat with his college friends. "Guys, I think I've got my date situation figured out for Saturday. Trust me, you're going to be very surprised." Carmen walked down the hallway from David's apartment, her cleaning supplies bag feeling heavier than usual. But it wasn't the weight of her equipment that bothered her. It was the weight of David's words echoing in her mind. The way he had spoken to her, the assumptions he had made, and most of all, the casual way he had offered to buy her clothes because he assumed she couldn't afford anything appropriate. She took the elevator down to the parking garage and got into her small but reliable car. As she drove through the city streets, Carmen's mind drifted back to a time when she wouldn't have needed anyone to buy her clothes for fancy dinners. A time when she was the one hosting elegant parties in a beautiful home, speaking multiple languages with international guests, and moving through high society like she was born to it, because she was born to it. Carmen pulled into the parking lot of her modest apartment building and sat in her car for a moment, looking up at the third-floor window that belonged to her small one-bedroom home. It was nothing like the spacious penthouse she cleaned twice a week, but it was hers. She had worked for every piece of furniture, every dish in the kitchen, every book on her shelves, inside her apartment. Carmen set down her cleaning supplies and walked to her bedroom closet. Behind her everyday clothes, pushed far to the back, hung a single garment bag. She unzipped it carefully, revealing a stunning black evening gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The dress was a reminder of her old life, one of the few expensive things she had managed to keep. When her world fell apart, Carmen's story wasn't one that most people would believe if she told them. She had grown up in Madrid, Spain, as the daughter of Ricardo Morales, a man who built a business empire from nothing. Her father started with a small import company and grew it into an international trading business that spanned 3 continents. By the time Carmen was a teenager, the Morales family was one of the wealthiest in Spain. Carmen's childhood was filled with private tutors, language lessons, and etiquette classes. She spoke Spanish, English, French, and Italian fluently. She learned to play piano and violin, studied art history, and spent summers traveling across Europe. Her parents made sure she understood that wealth came with responsibility, and they taught her to treat everyone with respect regardless of their social status. When Carmen turned 18, she enrolled at Universidad Complutense Madrid to study international business. Her father wanted her to eventually take over parts of the family company, and Carmen was excited about the prospect. She was smart, ambitious, and had a natural talent for understanding complex business deals, but during Carmen's 3rd year of college, everything changed in a single devastating month. It started with news reports about corruption in several major Spanish companies. Carmen's father assured the family that their business was clean, that they had nothing to worry about. But then investigators found evidence that some of Ricardo's business partners had been involved in money laundering schemes. Even though Ricardo himself wasn't directly involved, his company was connected to the scandal. The Spanish media tore the Morales family apart. Reporters camped outside their home, photographed Carmen walking to class, and published stories suggesting that the entire family was corrupt. Carmen's father tried to fight the accusations, but the damage was done. Business partners cut ties with the company, contracts were canceled, and investors pulled out. Within 6 months, the Morales empire collapsed completely. Carmen watched her father age 10 years in those months, the stress and shame eating away at him. Her mother, who had always been the picture of elegance and strength, became withdrawn and depressed. The family lost everything. Their beautiful home, their cars, their artwork, their jewelry, all of it was sold to pay debts and legal fees. Carmen had to leave university just months before graduation. The friends she thought she had disappeared when the money was gone. People who had once invited her to parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Carmen's parents made the difficult decision to leave Spain and start over in America. They used the last of their savings to buy plane tickets and move to a small apartment in the United States. Carmen's father, who had once commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar deals, took a job as a night security guard. Her mother, who had once hosted charity galas, cleaned offices to make ends meet. The adjustment was brutal for all of them. Carmen's parents had never learned to speak English well, and they struggled with the simplest tasks. Carmen, who was fluent in English, became their translator and advocate, helping them navigate everything from doctor visits to job applications. For 2 years, the family slowly started to rebuild. Carmen's father found better work at a logistics company, using his business experience even though he was earning a fraction of what he once made. Her mother got a job at a local bakery, and although it was hard work, she seemed to find peace. In the simple routine, Carmen was planning to re-enroll in college to finish her degree when the accident happened. Her parents were driving home from her mother's evening shift at the bakery when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit their car. They both died instantly. Carmen, who was 25 at the time, found herself completely alone in a foreign country with no family. Very little money and a mountain of grief. The funeral expenses used up most of the small savings her parents had managed to accumulate. Carmen was left with their tiny apartment, a few personal belongings, and the crushing weight of starting over completely by herself. She could have given up. She could have moved back to Spain and tried to rebuild connections with distant relatives, but something inside Carmen refused to surrender. Her parents had taught her that dignity wasn't about money or status. It was about how you treated others and how you handled whatever life threw at you. So, Carmen started cleaning houses. It wasn't what she had planned for her life, but it was honest work that paid the bills. She was meticulous and professional, traits that came naturally from her upbringing. Word spread quickly that Carmen was reliable and trustworthy, and soon she had a steady list of clients, but Carmen had bigger plans than just cleaning houses forever. In her small apartment, late at night after her cleaning jobs were done, she worked on building her own business. She used her knowledge of international trade and her language skills to help small companies navigate foreign markets. It was slow going, working just a few hours each evening, but she was building something. Carmen had kept her business consulting work completely separate from her cleaning jobs. Her clients knew her as Carmen Morales, international business consultant. Her cleaning clients knew her simply as Carmen, the quiet woman who made their homes spotless. David had no idea that the woman who cleaned his apartment was slowly building a consulting business that was starting to attract attention from major companies. He didn't know that Carmen spent her evenings analyzing market trends and writing business proposals. He certainly didn't know that she had grown up in a world far more sophisticated than his own. As Carmen stood in her apartment, looking at the evening gown that represented her past, she made a decision about David's invitation. She had spent 2 years being invisible, letting people make assumptions about who she was based on the work she did. But David's casual condescension that afternoon had awakened something in her. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. Carmen reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Isabella had been her roommate during her brief time in college in America, before the tragedy with her parents. Isabella now worked as a stylist for high-end events and had always told Carmen to call if she ever needed anything. Isabella? It's Carmen. I know this is short notice, but I have a favor to ask. The next morning, Carmen would call David and accept his invitation. But first, she had some preparations to make. If David wanted to bring his cleaning lady to dinner as entertainment for his friends, Carmen was going to give them a show they would never forget. She just wouldn't be playing the role David expected. David stood outside Romano's restaurant at exactly 7:45, checking his watch for the third time in 2 minutes. He had arrived early because he was nervous, though he wouldn't admit that to himself. His college friends were already inside, probably wondering where he was and who this mysterious date would be all week. David had been building up the suspense in their group chat. He had dropped hints about bringing someone completely unexpected and unlike anyone they'd ever met. His friends had tried to guess, maybe a famous actress, a social media influencer, someone from another country. David had enjoyed keeping them in the dark, promising that Saturday night would be unforgettable. Now, as he waited on the sidewalk in his expensive suit, David felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. Part of him was still amused by his own cleverness. He imagined his friends' faces when Carmen walked in wearing whatever simple dress she had managed to put together. They would be shocked, maybe even confused. But David was confident he could turn it into a charming story about being spontaneous and down-to-earth. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and David assumed it was just another wealthy customer arriving for dinner. Romano's attracted that kind of clientele every night. But then the car door opened, and David's entire world stopped. The woman who stepped out of the car was Carmen, but it was Carmen like David had never seen her before. She moved with the grace of someone who had walked red carpets, her posture perfect and confident. Her black evening gown hugged her figure elegantly, the fabric catching the light from the restaurant's entrance. Her dark hair was styled in a sophisticated updo that showcased her neck and shoulders. Diamond earrings sparkled at her ears, and her makeup was flawless but not overdone. But it wasn't just how Carmen looked that shocked David into silence. It was how she carried herself. This wasn't the quiet, almost invisible woman who cleaned his apartment. This was someone who clearly belonged in this world of luxury and elegance. David's mouth fell open as Carmen approached him. She smiled, and even her smile was different, confident and knowing, like she was enjoying a private joke. "Good evening, David," Carmen said, her voice carrying that slight accent that somehow sounded more elegant now than it ever had before. Double quotes Carmen. "I look," David stammered, struggling to form complete sentences. "Thank you," Carmen replied smoothly. "Shall we go inside? I believe your friends are waiting." David nodded, still too stunned to speak properly. He offered Carmen his arm, and as they walked toward the restaurant entrance, he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow the roles had reversed. He was supposed to be the one showing Carmen this world, but instead, she seemed more comfortable than he felt. The Mater D greeted them with the kind of respectful attention reserved for VIP guests. David gave his name, and they were led through the restaurant's main dining room toward a private section where his friends were waiting. Romano's was everything David had promised: elegant lighting, white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and the soft sound of classical music in the background. Other diners spoke in hushed tones, their expensive clothes and jewelry reflecting the restaurant's upscale atmosphere. As they approached the table, David saw his 3 college friends stand up to greet them. Alex, the lawyer, looked sharp in his tailored suit. Tony, the real estate mogul, wore a designer jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Kevin, who owned the fitness centers, had clearly spent extra time at the gym preparing for tonight, but David barely noticed his friends. He was too busy watching their faces as they saw Carmen for the first time. Alex's confident lawyer smile faltered slightly. Tony's eyebrows rose in obvious surprise. Kevin's jaw actually dropped. The 3 men looked from Carmen to David and back to Carmen, clearly trying to process what they were seeing. "Guys," David managed to say, his voice still shaky, "this is Carmen." Carmen stepped forward with the poise of someone who had attended hundreds of formal dinners. She extended her hand to each man in turn, greeting them with warm but refined politeness. "It's lovely to meet you all," Carmen said. "David has told me so much about your friendship over the years." Alex was the first to recover, taking Carmen's hand and giving her his most charming smile. The pleasure is entirely ours. David certainly knows how to keep us guessing. As they all took their seats, David noticed how naturally Carmen fit into the setting. She didn't look around nervously like someone who was out of place. She didn't seem intimidated by the fancy surroundings or the expensive menu. Instead, she settled into her chair like she had done this 1,000 times before, the other women. At the table, Alex's fiancée Rachel, Tony's girlfriend Lisa, and Kevin's wife Monica immediately seemed drawn to Carmen. They complimented her dress and began asking her questions about herself. "What do you do for work?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious. David tensed, wondering how Carmen would handle this question. He expected her to say she was a housekeeper or cleaner, which would certainly create an awkward moment. Instead, Carmen smiled and said, "I'm in international business consulting. I help companies expand into foreign markets." David's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What? How interesting," Monica said. "What kind of companies do you work with?" "Mostly smaller businesses that want to grow internationally but don't have the internal expertise," Carmen explained easily. "A lot of tech startups, actually. They have great products but don't understand the complexities of different market regulations and cultural preferences." Tony leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "That's exactly the kind of expertise I've been looking for. I'm trying to expand my real estate business into Europe, but I keep running into legal and cultural barriers." Carmen nodded knowingly. "European real estate markets can be tricky for American companies. Each country has different regulations, and what works in Germany might be completely wrong for Spain or France." As Carmen spoke, David realized she wasn't just making conversation. She clearly knew what she was talking about. Her explanations were detailed and sophisticated, showing a deep understanding of international business that David himself didn't possess. The conversation continued, and David watched in amazement as Carmen held her own with everyone at the table. When Alex mentioned a complex legal case involving international trade, Carmen offered insights that made the successful lawyer nod with respect. When Kevin talked about expanding his fitness centers to Latin America, Carmen spoke knowledgeably about market preferences in different countries, but the real shock came when the sommelier approached their table to discuss wine pairings for dinner. "For the seafood course, might I suggest a Sancerre from the Loire Valley?" The sommelier said in heavily accented English. Carmen responded in perfect French, engaging the sommelier in a detailed conversation about the wine's characteristics and how it would complement their meal choices. The sommelier's face lit up with delight at finding someone who could discuss wine with such expertise. David's friends stared in open amazement. Even their sophisticated partners seemed impressed by Carmen's knowledge and elegance. "You speak French beautifully," Lisa said when the sommelier moved on. "Thank you," Carmen replied. "I also speak Spanish, Italian, and a little German. Languages have always come easily to me." David felt like he was in some kind of dream. This couldn't be the same woman who quietly cleaned his apartment twice a week. The Carmen sitting next to him was cultured, educated, and clearly comfortable in high society. She was more sophisticated than most of the women David had dated, including the models and actresses he usually brought to events like this. As the evening progressed, David found himself feeling smaller and smaller. His friends were obviously charmed by Carmen, but David could see something else in their expressions. They were looking at him differently too, like they were trying to figure out how he had managed to find someone so impressive. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had invited Carmen as a joke, expecting his friends to be amused by his unconventional choice. Instead, they were clearly wondering why someone like Carmen was with someone like him. When Carmen excused herself to use the restroom, David's friends immediately pounced on him. "Dude, where have you been hiding her?" Tony demanded. "She's incredible," Alex added. "Smart, beautiful, sophisticated. How long have you two been together?" Kevin shook his head in disbelief. "And here we thought you only dated shallow Instagram models. Carmen is in a completely different league." David opened his mouth to explain, but no words came out. How could he tell his friends that Carmen was his cleaning lady? How could he admit that he had invited her as entertainment, expecting her to be out of place and awkward? When Carmen returned to the table, she looked at David with those knowing eyes, and he realized she could see exactly what he was thinking. She had turned his joke completely around on him, and somehow he was the one who looked foolish. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of sophisticated conversation, with Carmen at the center of it all. David's friends hung on her every word, and by the end of the evening they were already making plans to see her again. As they prepared to leave, David realized that his simple joke had become something much more complicated. Carmen had shown him a world where his assumptions meant nothing, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. The ride back to Carmen's apartment was the longest 20 minutes of David's life. He sat in the driver's seat of his expensive car, hands gripping the steering wheel, while Carmen sat beside him in elegant silence. The classical music playing softly from his sound system felt like it was mocking him. David's mind was racing with everything that had happened at dinner. His friends had exchanged contact information with Carmen. Tony had already scheduled a meeting with her about his European expansion plans. Alex's fiancée Rachel had invited Carmen to her upcoming charity gala. Kevin and Monica had asked her to join their book club, which apparently discussed international literature. His joke had not only failed spectacularly, but Carmen had somehow become the most popular person at the table. David felt like he had been watching his life from outside his body, seeing himself become smaller and more insignificant as the evening went on. "You can drop me off here," Carmen said quietly as they approached her neighborhood. David looked around at the modest apartment buildings, so different from his upscale area of the city. "Are you sure I can take you right to your door?" "This is fine," Carmen replied, her voice still carrying that same composed tone she had used all evening. David pulled over and put the car in park, but neither of them moved to get out. The silence stretched between them like a heavy blanket. Finally, David couldn't stand it anymore. "Carmen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "who are you?" Carmen turned to look at him, and in the dim light from the street lamps, David could see something in her eyes that he had never noticed before. It was intelligence, yes, but also sadness and strength and something that looked like pity. "I'm exactly who I've always been," Carmen said simply. "You just never bothered to ask." The words hit David like a physical blow. He thought about all the times Carmen had cleaned his apartment, all the mornings when she had greeted him politely and he had barely acknowledged her presence. He realized that in 2 years he had never asked her a single personal question. He didn't know where she was from, whether she had family, what her dreams were, or what her life was like outside his apartment. "But you single quotes double quotes." David struggled to find the right words. "You're educated, sophisticated, you speak multiple languages. You know about business and wine and culture. Why are you cleaning houses?" Carmen was quiet for a long moment, and David could see her deciding how much to tell him. "Sometimes life doesn't go the way we plan," she said finally. "Sometimes we end up doing work that pays the bills while we rebuild everything else." "Rebuild from what?" Carmen looked out the passenger window at the quiet street. "My family lost everything when I was in college. Everything. I came to this country with nothing but the clothes on my back and had to start over completely." David felt his chest tighten as he began to understand the magnitude of what Carmen was telling him. "And the cleaning work was honest work that helped me survive while I built something new," Carmen finished. "I've been running my consulting business for the past year. It's small, but it's growing." David sat back in his seat, feeling overwhelmed. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Carmen's laugh was soft, but not entirely kind. "When would I have told you, David? In the 2 years I've worked for you, the longest conversation we've had was about whether you wanted me to use a different cleaning product in your bathroom. You see me as the cleaning lady, nothing more?" The truth of her words was undeniable. David realized that he had treated Carmen like she was invisible, like she was part of the furniture in his apartment. He had made assumptions about her intelligence, her background, her worth as a person, all based on the job she did for him. "Tonight," David said slowly, "when you came to dinner looking like that? When you spoke with my friends like you belonged there, was that all just to prove a point?" Carmen considered the question carefully. "Partly," she admitted. but also because that's who I really am. The woman who cleans your apartment is me too, but she's not all of me. Tonight you gotta see the person I was before life knocked me down and the person I'm becoming again. David felt something crack inside his chest. It might have been his pride or his assumptions about the world, or maybe just his heart realizing how badly he had misjudged someone. Your friends are lovely people, Carmen continued. They treated me with respect and kindness from the moment we met. They asked about my life, my work, my interests. They saw me as a person worth knowing. The implication was clear. David's friends had done in one evening what David had failed to do in 2 years. Carmen, David started, but he didn't know how to finish the sentence. How do you apologize for seeing someone as less than human? How do you make up for 2 years of casual dismissal and condescension? I should go, Carmen said, reaching for the door handle. Wait, David said quickly. What happens now? I mean, with the cleaning job, with us? Carmen paused with her hand on the door. I've been thinking about that. My consulting business is doing well enough now that I can afford to be more selective about my cleaning clients. I think it's time for me to focus on building my real career. David felt panic rise in his throat. You're quitting? I'm moving forward, Carmen corrected. Gently, it's time. She stepped out of the car, but before closing the door, she leaned down to look at him one more time. David, can I give you some advice? He nodded, not trusting his voice. The way you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you says everything about who you really are. Your friends tonight? They're going to remember the elegant, intelligent woman they met, but I'll remember the man who invited his cleaning lady to dinner as entertainment for his friends. Carmen closed the car door and walked away, her heels clicking on the sidewalk until she disappeared into her apartment building. David sat in his car for a long time, staring at the building and trying to process everything that had happened. Over the next few weeks, David's life felt strangely empty. He hired a new cleaning service, but it wasn't the same. The new cleaners were efficient but impersonal. They came and went without David even seeing them, which should have been what he wanted. Instead, he found himself missing Carmen's quiet presence. His friends, meanwhile, couldn't stop talking about Carmen. Tony ended up hiring her consulting firm to help with his European expansion, and within 3 months, she had saved him from making several costly mistakes. Alex invited her to legal networking events where her international expertise was highly valued. Kevin and Monica became genuine friends with her, often mentioning funny stories from their book club meetings. David watched from the sidelines as Carmen became part of his social circle in a way she never could have as his cleaning lady. She was invited to parties, included in group dinners, and treated as an equal by everyone who met her. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had introduced Carmen to this world. But now he was the one who felt like an outsider. The transformation in David himself was gradual but undeniable. He started noticing the people who worked in his building, the security guards, the maintenance staff, the delivery drivers. He learned their names and asked about their lives. He discovered that Jerry, the night security guard, was putting himself through law school. Maria, who cleaned the building's common areas, was saving money to bring her children to America from Guatemala. David began to understand that everyone had a story, dreams, and dignity that had nothing to do with their job title or income level. Carmen had taught him this lesson in the most humbling way possible. 6 months after that dinner at Romano's, David received an invitation in the mail. It was elegant, printed on expensive paper with gold lettering. Carmen was hosting a launch party for her new consulting firm, which had grown successful enough to move into a downtown office space. David stared at the invitation for a long time, wondering if he should attend. Would Carmen even want him there? Did he deserve to celebrate her success after the way he had treated her? In the end, he decided to go, not to congratulate himself on discovering Carmen, but to acknowledge the woman who had taught him the most important lesson of his life. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who can change us the most, if we're brave enough to really see them.